What's up, Snakes and Rattles? This is just a short, kind of silly, rambling, video log style, speculation, thinking out loud kind of video. If you don't like that, skip away now. But if you like it, stick around. I want to tell you a little bit about, I was thinking about how people get offended a lot. And that's something we often think about, is how people get offended so easily. Why does everything have to be so politically correct? And I see where they're coming from. I kind of feel that as well. I'm like, people really do get offended by everything. There's a few things to unpack with all this, though. I'm kind of just thinking about the psychology of it, the sociology of it out loud. And these are theories, these are hypotheses, rather. These could be wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But I try to be kind about it. Everyone's so mean on YouTube to each other. Not that I'll be offended or anything. No, you be mean to me. It's all right. I deserve it. But let's talk about being offended. I think what's interesting about it is, for starters, we tend to tell people or accuse other people of being offended when it's someone else. You notice that a lot, that if someone else seems bothered by something or annoyed by something that you think is fine, or they are irritated or vexed, or their feelings are hurt, or they're sad, or they're upset, or they're distraught, whether it's let's say it's a movie, a show, an opinion, or a political figure, or a thing in history, or a philosophy, whatever it is, a law, a rule for some organization or whatever. Let's say that for someone else, it really bothers them. And it really bugs them. But for you, it doesn't bother you at all. Well, you'll easily say, if you're like me, I'm saying you in the general sense, you, but maybe this doesn't apply to all of you. We don't have a distinct second person plural in English, and that's okay. But you'll say they're offended. Oh, that person's offended. Oh, why do they get so offended? People are so offended. But you notice that when something bothers you, if you get, like, let's say someone remakes a movie you really like, and they mess it up with the remake, it's not very good. Or let's say someone uses the term that you think is a dumb term, or stupid, or not likable, or mean, or rude. Or let's say someone is just rude to you, or says something that you find rude. Any of these things, if you get bothered by them, if you get annoyed, vexed, upset, hurt feelings, discouraged, distraught, in any way upset, or even just bothered, or find it annoying, you are also being offended. So, though it's interesting, though, is that we don't think of ourselves as being offended because the status of being someone who is offended, or the status of being someone who is easily offended, is so stigmatized, because naturally none of us like people who are offended. But even with ourselves, though, we might get offended just as easily, just over different stuff. So really, we don't have that much of a problem with people being offended. We just think that they should have the exact same values and opinions and sensibilities and demeanor toward the exact same things that we have. And then they would be either offended by the same stuff as us and not offended by the same stuff we are not offended by. So it's not so much that we have a problem being offended, we just have a problem with people being different than us. And perhaps that's understandable. If someone's not offended at, say, slavery, and we're offended by it, then maybe we have a right to be annoyed that they don't have the same sensibilities to us. Personally, I am annoyed at anyone, more than annoyed, at anyone who doesn't mind slavery or isn't offended by it, okay? But I'm different from other people, right? But if someone else comes along and they're just so annoyed with what they did with Star Wars, let's say, it's 8, right? Which is The Last Jedi. I won't give spoilers here, but some people really liked it, but a lot of people really didn't like the direction they took with things like that. And I don't feel as strongly, but I kind of see where they were coming from. I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I wouldn't have done those things also. I would have done it the way the critics are describing. I kind of came around to being like, yeah, I would have made it differently. But some people are just really, really upset with those changes. They don't like it. They put out videos, some of them quite compelling, about how it should be different, why it annoyed what they did with, say, Luke Skywalker's character or someone else's character, or just the storyline, or how force works, or how warp speed or whatever works. And you'll notice that people who are really bothered by those things don't call themselves, I'm offended at this. But people who are fine with it, we're like, oh, those people are offended. Again, offended is something that other people are, but not you, right? You don't get offended. You just get annoyed at truly annoying things, or bothered by truly bothersome things, or hold in contempt truly contemptible things, or infuriated by truly infuriating things, or upset by truly upsetting things. But you don't get offended, do you? But of course, that's a lie. You do get offended. We all do. Everybody gets offended, and everyone wants to imagine that they don't get offended. It's just everyone else. But that's a total lie we tell each other, and we tell ourselves. So the next time someone says, I'm bothered by how much people get offended, note that to yourself with that person, just how often they likely, maybe they're an exception, are offended by things, but they don't call it offense. So that's that other point there. And the final point here is the climax, the core of this whole little dumb rambling spiel, which is that there's nothing that bothers us, annoys us, vexes us more, offends us more than this thing. And finally, preamble to this final point. I'm using offended in a pretty reasonable sense, pretty broad sense, but specific enough that it doesn't just include everything. If I stub my toe and it hurts me, that's not the same as being offended. If something is just generally, I'm having a sad day, that's not offended. Offended has a definition. It has restrictive meaning. But offended is not so restricted that in order to be offended, you're someone who is trying to boycott the thing. It's perfectly possible to be offended and not trying to boycott or take down or censor something. You could be offended by something, but completely support that it has a freedom to be there, whether it's an opinion or a statement, a movie, a show, a philosophy, political figure, whatever. Okay, so I'm not saying that offended, in order to qualify as offended, you must also be trying to take it down, trying to boycott it, trying to put out a petition. No. Offended just means it's something that someone says or does, or it's an opinion or statement or action that someone took or is taking that is bothersome or annoying or vexing or irritating or upsetting to you because you find it to be wrong in some way, inappropriate in some way, or annoying in some way, or just dislikable or contemptible. So that's why if someone spills water on you and doesn't apologize, you're annoyed, you're offended. If someone takes your favorite movie and says, that movie is only popular with dumb people, only dumb people like that movie, you find that kind of irritating and stupid, you're offended in the sense that you're finding it irritating. So don't redefine offended or offense every time so that it always includes other people and not you. I'm just saying whatever definition you use for offended, you've got to apply that equally and fairly to others as well as yourself. You can't have this really restrictive definition so that it doesn't include you when you're talking about yourself, but then a liberal enough definition, allowing enough definition that everyone else who's bothered by stuff is offended. Got to be actually consistent and reasonable, at least within a reasonable boundary. So here it is. What offends people the most is people being offended. That's the irony of it, is that it in itself is, of course, a kind of offense. It's a meta thing, isn't it? Because if you're offended that other people are offended, you are also being offended. So isn't that worthwhile, someone else being offended at you? But of course, it only works and happens so often because when it's you that's offended, you don't think of it as you being offended, do you? All three of these major points, 3 or 4, whatever, this constellation of points about offense and being offended all tie back together. The only way that we can constantly be offended by other people being offended without feeling like we're hypocrites is if we are constantly moving the goal point, the benchmark, the threshold for what counts as offense, so that it's always other people who count as offended, but not ourselves. So think about it. If someone is, I'm not saying any opinion on this, all right, one way or another. I'm not supporting this or that or against it or whatever. I'm just using it because it was in the news a lot recently. If someone's kneeling during Pledge of Allegiance at a football game or sports game, if they're doing it because something's bothering them, they want to protest or whatever, they're offended. Sure, they're offended. They're offended to they're voicing that offense, right? But if you're bothered that they're doing that, and you're annoyed that they're doing that, and I don't like that, you're offended also. You're offended that they're offended. So you can't kind of separate yourself as only other people are offended, and I'm just bothered at them for being offended. Oh, did you see what PETA did? PETA's offended because in this video game, you like punch a monkey, and don't they realize it's just a video game? I'm offended at them. No, you're offended that someone else is offended. And maybe they're being ridiculous in their stance. Maybe they're being silly. Maybe they don't make any sense. Maybe they're laughable. But you can't pretend like you are above the fray of being offended. And I'm not saying some people are right to be offended. And I'm not saying that everyone who's offended is equally right or wrong. Maybe there's some things you are right to be offended by, and some things you're wrong to be offended by. That's perfectly possible, but you can't pretend that you are not offended when you are offended just because the thing you're offended at is someone else being offended. That seems like a lot of wordplay and a lot to wrap your mind around, but it's not that much. It's actually a pretty simple point. If you're bothered and irritated enough to voice something that's vexing you at someone else because of what they're bothered and irritated enough to voice their opinion about that's vexing them, you're just as offended as they are. Maybe you're right to be offended, they're not. But you can't play this game like pretending like they're offended, I'm not. I'm just being reasonable. No, you're offended also. Get used to it, get over it. Or don't. Just embrace that you're offended and that we're all offended every time people are annoying to us. Every time people are irritating or rude to us, that's an offensive. Or every time someone passes a law and we find the law to be unfair or stupid or overstepping or not doing enough, or it's all right to get offended. And yet, while saying that, we can also say, yeah, people who are constantly voicing their malcontent, even if they're right about everything they say, those people are often irritating. Because even if someone's right with everything that they do, if they're going around saying, I don't like how this is this really bothers me how this is this, I think it's pretty annoying and stupid how this, they could say everything that you agree with and is true. It's just the kind of person who's saying that all the time. That's what they talk about. It's annoying. I get that, and I agree with you. I'm not dismissing that. So, like, as an example, one more final example about offended at other people of being offended. With that song, I won't say if it was right or wrong. I heard the counter argument about how it actually, in the context of the culture and the history at the time, it didn't mean what you think, and you have to look in deeper, so it's not that bothersome in that way. But let's not get into the pros and cons of this issue. I'm just looking at it as an example. That song that it's called Baby It's Cold Outside. Baby It's Cold Outside. Regardless of what you think about whether it's actually has any kind of, bad culture or whatever to it, or offensive, problematic stuff to it, you have to admit it's kind of crappy sounding. Like the tune, the melody is kind of dumb. And the guy is so whiny and contemptible. He's just annoying. See, that's me being offended at how annoying. I'm not offended at any perceived problematic or sexism. I'm just offended by how annoying and whiny. You're going to hurt my pride. Dude, shut up. Get a different lady to come over. She doesn't want to be there. Anyway, sidetrack. But I've been convinced I'm not offended anymore at that, oh, it's problematic. I get it, the context, history. But if, using that as an example, if someone else was offended by the song and they saw it as problematic, then you were so offended that people were annoyed by it and upset by it and wanted it off the radio or preferred to not hear it, you're just as offended as they are. You can't start jumping into the mud and pretend. So if you agree or even understand where I'm coming from and you don't agree, even just the tiniest percentage of the points that I'm trying to make, perhaps failing, but trying to make, then the key takeaway is to not fall for the trap of people who are trying to trick you. And you're often falling for it. You're probably often falling for it. If you clicked on this video, maybe you don't fall for it, but there's a good chance you often fall for it. Here's the trick. Here's the trap. They get you with this. People posting up articles, videos, blogs, whatever. They make clickbait article title headlines that say things like, people are now demanding a transgender Santa, or people are calling for a black James Bond. All right, so then you actually, if you just do an angry reaction on Facebook or a sad reaction, like, what the hell? Like, it's so annoying. You're offended. Why does everything have to be so politically correct and inclusive? Why do you have to change everything to do, So it's a trick. This is a trick because then you actually click on it, you find out. So they ask like 30 people, hey, would you care if there was a transgender Santa? And then like a number of them were like, dude, I don't care either way. Why does it matter? And then they take that, they twist it, and they warp it into people are calling for Santa to be transgender. Or same thing with polling about James Bond or whatever. It's fake, made-up outrage that is twisting a poll or even just an anecdote or an interview in order to make it seem like there's this overwhelming swath of people being offended and you are part of the the surviving few who see above all that, who is not offended, but is calling out that actually it's the other way around. You are in the vast majority. You are in the mob. There's no one who is actively calling for the transgender Santa. Actually, I wouldn't mind it either way. I wouldn't care. But that's the point. A lot of people said they wouldn't care. And other people said they were against it. And some people probably said they were quite for it. But it wasn't some overwhelming people demanding that Santa Claus become transgender. As if you could make a fictional character that's kind of part of folklore and popular culture and so forth just switch like that. It's an identity that doesn't belong to any one person's intellectual property. But even if it could, imagine how silly it is. Just think of how silly it is, the situation we're in, where they can take some little polar anecdote and say, people are demanding this, get a bunch of people to be offended at the notion that some people are offended, in this case, offended that he's not transgender, and then stir up that fake outrage in order to make it so that you are offended, but then make it so that you don't feel like a hypocrite for being offended by telling yourself that you're not offended. You're just angry at this BS, but AKA offended, but you won't call it that. And the words matter. And so as long as you don't think of yourself as offended, you don't mind being offended as all get out at the idea of other people being offended, even when it's a trap and they weren't even offended in the first place. The only people who were offended were the counter-offense people. It's a bunch of people being offended at people that they were told were offended who weren't even existing to be offended in the first place. So I saw this before as well. So I spoke with someone, happened to be a right-wing conservative guy. Nothing wrong with that. I'm sure myself and many others have a number of issues that we are left-wing on or right-wing on or both, etc. But this person was like, people are so offended right now. Even in the Women's March, there are people offended by the vagina hats. They said, well, because they were pink or red or the basic color they wear, that was offensive for people of color. It didn't include them. And therefore, and this conservative was saying, and so see, even within their own context, liberals are so offended at everything that they can't do anything. And I'm so tired of that. People are so offended. What the heck? And he went on and showed genuine offense. Like he was offended as all heck at how offended these people were who wanted more colors for the vagina hat. Then I click into the article he's talking about, and I click in and I read down, and it was like 3 people out of like 1 million or 100,000 or whatever it was. 3 people who were like, yeah, you know what? It would be nice if they also made vagina hats that were different colors. I think that'd be fun. That'd be inclusive and nice. That'd be cool. But the article twisted it, blew it up as overwhelmingly Women's March people and liberals are demanding that these hats be burned or else they include every color. So it was fake offense, fake outrage in order to get real counter outrage, real counter offense. And if you clicked on this video, there's a good chance, again, you might have fallen for it. Or if someone gave this video to you, you're falling for this nonsense because you're not thinking hard enough about this. You're not thinking they just want clicks and they know enough about human nature to know that nothing offends people more than the perception that other people are offended and you're not offended, but you've just had enough of that. That's all I gotta say.